So we're going to be talking about the poster design and layout, a significant component of the overall presentation that Elizabeth's just been talking about. The two work sort of side by side for the overall communication that you'll be delivering. Now I appreciate that when you commit your ideas to a piece of paper, some people don't feel quite so confident in what they're trying to put across. So hopefully I've been able to wrap up a number of little guides here for you to help you make the strongest presentation possible for the poster design. Try and consider first of all what we expect the viewer to be looking for. And I do expect a little bit of overlap here in terms of how what Elizabeth was previously saying, because you need to create the best synergy between the printed poster and how you talk about it. So we've got to consider if the poster explains your research in a clear, concise manner that a non-subject specialist can understand. So consider editorially the title. Maybe you want to have a simple title and a complex subtitle, so to help lower the barrier into a very technical subject. Does the poster convey the reasons why you're spending 3 years researching in that particular field? This is a very difficult point to simplify, because obviously we want to make the messages as simple as possible and yet convey 3 years research. So it's a difficult thing to balance there. Does the poster present your work without the use of complex graphs and diagrams? Or would the use of a graph or diagram communicate more than just a paragraph of text? For example, if you're dealing with data, you might not care too much if someone reads the actual graph or diagram, but it's still important to visually signal the presence of diagrammatic information as a key to your research. So these are all things to consider. Is it easy to understand the order in which the text on the poster should be read? An A1 sheet of paper is very large. When someone is confronted with it initially, they will possibly not be sure where to begin looking at the poster. We all start at the top left and usually work our way through to the bottom right. However, with a poster, you might want to have someone focus on the center initially with a large diagram or photograph, and then for the person looking at the poster to begin to explore the poster. So the way in which somebody begins to make that investigation is really a key to how the design works. What will the viewer be looking for? So is the text size appropriate? Can it be read from a short distance away? We try and work within sort of 5–10 feet. Or if you just get an A4 sheet of paper and just hold it at arm's length, is it clear what the A4 sheet of paper is about, or do you start having to bring it closer to you to have to read the small text? So you've got to try and think about making the message work from a short distance away. So as people are walking past your poster in waves, Janesh, they will see the large text and go, I get it, and they'll come closer and find out more. Is there too much text or too little text, too much information? Is there an information overload? Only you'll know the answer to that question. I will be trying to show some little cues and guides to help you sort of work through these issues. The next point here, can you answer questions about your poster and your work when asked by the judges and other students? So what I'm saying here is be careful not to put something on your poster unless you have all the information surrounding it, because the worst case scenario, somebody will begin to investigate the part of your poster you least want them to talk about. So make sure every single point on the poster is something that you're confident about. What makes a good poster? Of course, the judges will decide that. But I think it really its key is to carefully choose the purpose and the key points. Familiarity with your audience. We spoke before with Liz. We don't know who the audience is, so you've got to have to try and think about lowering the barrier of the language. The technical language is important. You can't throw that away, but you've got to think of improving upon the normal academic document when trying to title and to create headers for the different sections in your poster, or the descriptive language you might choose to use. The aesthetic appeal, for example, how do you make somebody want to look at your poster? Sometimes that's by not making the poster look too densely packed with information so they think they haven't got time in their busy agenda to spend to look at the poster. And again, I'll be showing you a couple of tips about how to make the poster look less heavy, a burden to read and to look at. A clear structure for your information is always important. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with that one way or another from a normal academic document. With a poster, there's a few things to consider, but the information hierarchy and forming a definite conclusion is still the key, regardless, and we just have to do it in a slightly different way. Moving on. Effective layout, headings, and color coordination all contribute to create this clear navigation. Limited but effective design palette. So when we're talking about color coordination, we don't want to have a huge array of colors. You want to limit it to a small suite of maybe 5 colors, including white and black, or a very dark gray for text. And the colors should be kind of wedded around the subject matter. Use of fontography, your fonts, your typographic hierarchy, etc. We want a limited number of fonts, not too many. Too many fonts suggest too many voices. There is an attachment that you would use a different voice maybe if you wanted to suggest somebody else was had a commentary or something to say about something to do with your poster. So possibly if you were suggesting a large community vocal on a subject, then there's a good reason why you might want to use some different fonts. You might want to suggest many contributions from different ethnic backgrounds, and then language also might have an influence upon font choice. But generally speaking, you would only want to use 1 or possibly 2 different font weights. The typographic hierarchy, so in say a Microsoft Office world, that would mean your H1, your H2 and your H3 to help give the reader a sense of the title, the subtitle and any points underneath that. The actual production of the poster, well, this is what we're referring to here really as the output. You want a good color, high resolution images and a good quality paper. The paper, the poster itself may be put up on the wall, taken down, repositioned, moved somewhere else, put up again. And you wouldn't want it to get dog-eared in the corners with all the attaching to the wall. It's a practical thing to consider, and I will be trying to offer you some further tips on that a little bit later on in this presentation. If we actually get them to the layout of a poster itself, we want the content well structured and consistent, simple and legible in the design. What you can see in the little thumbnails we've got here are a grid. You can see the grid here. I'm just trying to draw on the screen for you. Hopefully you can all see the yellow line appearing around it. You see this grid of boxes so that the white space is subdivided down, and instantly that becomes a more simple proposition then to think about how you want to use the space. We can divide it into, I often use 12 columns. But you don't have to do that. 2 columns, 3 columns, 4 columns. This helps you then sort of start to think about how the story, the narrative might unfold, the beginning, the middle, the end of your poster. How are we beginning? The introduction, the conclusion, maybe the large photograph. So you can see here that this photograph is clearly very important when we're talking about the subject of rough science. So the 2 things contribute to one another. How the titling on the lower example here is put up at an angle, to help subdivide the space and break the viewer down so that we don't feel we've got too much information to deal with. The grid forms the basis of a page foundation always. And as you can see with the examples on when we're talking about the poster layout grid again, we can now afford to have a smaller text. This smaller text creates a secondary narrative. Maybe this text is a footnote, or you want to elaborate on a particular point, but you don't want it to interfere with the story you're telling in the primary narrative. So you can tell a story in a very simplified way to do with a very complicated topic, using simple language that's very easy to understand, and then you might want to then annotate these further points into margins, even with small pictorial cues to help signpost them through the document. And it doesn't clutter the reader up. They can then go and look at that information if they choose to, or they can choose to ignore it, and it still doesn't interfere with the overall communication. We'll move along to the next slide. Typography. So as I was saying earlier on, we want to limit the number of fonts if possible. The font tends to be the voice that we're choosing to use. The two main fonts that you'll be choosing are either a sans serif, these fonts at the top here. They don't have the kind of classic serifs, the sharp pointy bits around the tops and the bottoms there. It's considered a modern look to have the sans serif, and this forms a much stronger subtitle arrangement. If you do have a lot of text to use on your poster, it may be worth thinking about using the serif font, as the serifs do help create lines in order for people to follow and read if they're reading a large paragraph, for example. I do try and encourage you to resist the temptation to use lots of text, but it's just sometimes not possible, and we do appreciate that. We talked about justification a little earlier on. Again, it's your choice. Justified text emerged from the print industry of newspapers, where the newspaper editors had to be very economical about how they used white space on their sheets. And so it was about trying to rack up the text overnight as quickly as possible into the space available. The problem with justified text, it creates these gaps between the words which can slow the reader down, because as they're trying to read something, you lose a rhythm in terms of how you're trying to read things. With justified text, left-align text rather, that doesn't occur. Now you do get this classic ragged right effect, and then the challenge for a professional typographer is to reduce that to the minimum amount of effort for the reader to overcome. So these are the two broad options. Numbers, you would align your numbers right where possible, and centering is a typographic technique that I try to avoid as a rule. But often for titles, etc., or for diagrams, centering of text is a very useful technique to deploy. All of these alignment options contribute to the way that a reader is going to navigate your poster design. They will see the text in different justifications, and they will start to group it together when they're reading, and they will associate center text in a way that you have defined by using it the way you have chosen to. So if you do start to, for example, center text in your titles, and then you start to center text on your references, for example, it might confuse somebody because they will make the assumption that the references and the titles are in some way connected when they're quickly scanning your poster looking for something of interest. So bear in mind that you actually start to codify what you're doing by using these different options, and so do it thoughtfully when you're proceeding with your design. Let's move along to the next slide. The space between the lines of your text when you're creating paragraphs helps create density in the text. Now, if we look at the example on the right with the cross through it, the one that we try to avoid, its overall impression is that it's heavier. Because we have less space in between it, it looks more dense, more packed, and less inviting to read, harder to read. The example on the left, because it creates an overall more grey effect on the screen and ultimately on the white page of paper, the white space between the lines creates an easier entry point to read the text. Another thing to note is that you want to try and aim for about 60 characters per line maximum. So what this does, according to the research, is it enables speedier reading, and it simplifies the process of leaving one line and starting the next one correctly. Sometimes if you get this balance wrong, the space and the number of characters, it can create the unfortunate situation where you start to loop on the same row of text and you miss coming down to the next line. It's just a little tip there. So If you say got a lot of text and you want to put on the screen, count the characters in a row. And if you're up to 120, 130 characters in that one line of text, you've got to up your type size, or you're going to really make life difficult for the reader. Basic formatting, consistent use of space between headers, body, bullets, etc. Information grouped, and using the right space between things, we create lovely areas for people to scan the document. They can see what is collectively part of the document in one space and what is somewhere else, and how these different areas link together. And that again all helps contribute to enabling someone to walk up to your poster, blinking, taking a first impression, and hopefully getting it straight away, getting exactly what it is you're talking about. They'll see the groupings of the information, and it's all clearly, concisely framed with nice white space between the lines and the line lengths not too long. Bullet points, again, the space between the bullet points, all to help contribute to this basic simple narrative. When we're looking at color options, this is one of the hardest things to think about actually. When using the typography, there are some rules that we can apply that will basically get you through most situations. When it comes to color, we're starting to enter into rather subjective areas. That's why we say it's best to try and think in terms of a small palette of colors, choosing colors that have a harmony with one another, 2 or 3 colors, and maybe one color that has a strong contrast, so that if you need to emphasize a point, you could use that color in a thoughtful and meaningful way. The Open University itself, we use a palette of colors. This palette that we show here is slightly out of date now with what we currently use on our marketing materials. I've just put it here just to demonstrate the kind of how we organize our colors from the point of view of an organization, looking at colors to communicate our marketing or our internal requirements, and trying to create a sort of family feel with all the different types of documents we produce. You don't have to keep to these colors. You can create your own palette if you want to. You can choose your favorite colors if you've got a strong sense of color and what you like. I will give you a link in a later slide which will take you to a website which will help you create harmonies of colors, cooler.adobe.com. It's a really useful site to help you manage the process of finding colors that work for you. But I think the bottom principle here, though, is how important white is in order to help create this space. And white is a color, and it's a color that we use thoughtfully. It's not that we ignore it and just make the best use of the piece of paper. There are many reasons why using white is a positive thing for your overall design. Try and avoid using black on text. Try and use the darkest gray. The contrast between black and white can be very strong, and it can strobe a little bit in certain cases when people are reading text. So let's say I usually take my black down to about 90–95% if possible for printed materials. Using complementary colors. So this is really where we're talking about how to create families of colors for your palettes, and considering what colors work together to create lovely harmonies and contrasts, to create meaningful work for meaningful color combinations for your work. If we're dealing with something contemplative, if we're dealing with something challenging, mysterious, you might want to use an array of purples through to greys and whites, or you might want to use for something that's sort of an enlightening topic, you might want to sort of think about harmonizing lots of colors through from tangerine through to deep reds. You can decide that. It's what you decide is what's going to ultimately determine how well you do in the competition. So all I want to just show you here is again how we've looked at some hot colors and some sort of earthy colors as we sort of put them together and see how they look on these examples. And from here we then make a decision. I do this all the time within design, to create these sort of mood boards where I sort of wonder to myself if the colors themselves help me understand the subject better, Do I think they relate to the subject? Do I think they have nothing to do with science if I choose a certain family of colours, for example? Don't spend too long on it. I'm sure within sort of 20 minutes you'll say, yep, they're the colours for me, and off you go. But it's really important to get it right. Another way to consider how to use the right colours is if you've got a very important photograph in your piece of work, you might want to somehow draw upon that as an influence for the palette that you choose to use for the text around it. This can create some really great effects, really sophisticated final finish to the poster design. If you have access to certain graphics tools such as Photoshop, you get a little a way to sample colors out of the images, and you can then use the numbers provided there to create RGB palettes for colors. If that all sounds a little bit too sophisticated for you, then you can still take a best guess based on the way, for example, PowerPoint might enable you to create little palettes for yourself within the options available. Do feel free, by the way, as we're proceeding, to message in or ask any questions, and we will try and work through those as we go along. It's important to get the correct resolution of the images. The A1 poster is quite a large size. I'll give you the exact measurements shortly, because I can't quite remember it off the top of my head. But it is a large piece of paper. Now, a normal web graphic, for example, is not going to be big enough, broadly speaking, to look good on that size of paper. Not only will it not look good in resolution, but also it may not have the color strength that you hoped it had when you saw it on screen. They can start to look washed out. They can start to look just wrong for any number of reasons. So it's important to try and achieve the best quality image. In previous years, we might have said get a 300 dpi image, as I say on the slide here. That's slightly misleading with digital cameras nowadays, which will tend to output at 72 dpi, but give you thousands and thousands of pixels in the width and the height. So the thing to do is to set up your document from the very start at the correct size, and try your images at the correct size of the poster. Import the image into PowerPoint or into InDesign and see how much of the space it covers. Don't scale it. Don't make it bigger, certainly. You can go smaller to achieve an improved quality, but you can't go bigger when you scale up. It always looks worse. So I do have some links to some image places where you can get some open source, free to use images for your poster design. But the rule of thumb is it's got to be big, and you have to just drop it on the screen nowadays and see how it looks on a one-to-one size in your poster design, and that will give you as good a gauge as anything. I do also recommend that you do a output proof when you're close to finishing to ensure that you're not disappointed in the final output. Yeah. So what we're going to look at now, we're going to look at some examples of some posters. These are all famous posters. These aren't examples of previous posters from the competition. These are posters. These aren't the posters you're going to be designing for your competition. Quite clearly, the Tate Gallery here by Tube. They haven't got a lot of text to worry about. But what the designer's done is they've managed to. I don't know if we moved on quickly there. Hey. Someone's flicking through some posters. What these posters are, though, are examples of how creatively subject matter and subjects and titles can be captured through the use of a limited palette of colors, limited shapes, and the breaking down of the space into different sections to make navigation easy. Let's flick back to here. So, although this is a very simple solution, the designer who's been asked to put this poster together has been very clever in combining the subject of art with the tube map when trying to promote the idea of using the tube to go and see art. It's a very old poster now, this one, and it still is very clever in how you can walk past this and just get it in one single glance. The next poster here about the Jazz International Festival, It's very sophisticated, but what I want to draw your attention to in this poster in particular is the way that the mountain range at the bottom has cleverly concealed all the logos. When you've got to put these logos together on these posters, it's actually a bit of a challenge. Some people will only have the Open University. Some people may have several logos of sponsors and partners, etc., that they want to promote through their poster design. And you don't want them to get in the way. You want to just push them somewhere where they're out of the way of your design, but in the way for somebody who wants to see it. And I think that's particularly clever how this has been integrated. The use of silhouettes in the jazz poster as well is a very simple thing for you to do, and yet it looks completely sophisticated here. This is possibly the Drugs World poster. It's possibly a better example of the kind of posters you might hope to produce. Simple use of color, very limited palette, very simple diagrammatic approach, very easy to navigate the content here with the large text for the stimulants, the antipsychotics, etc. They have smaller subtext titles on those areas, a more layman's term underneath the slightly more technical term. So the barrier for access to understanding this poster is lowered. So a technical person and a non-technical person might enjoy this. And I think personally it actually also looks really good because I like these with the white space, and I like the simple motif of the 4 colors in the middle and the circles. And this is an alternative way of looking at the tube map, but in this case the designer has chosen to borrow the language, the visual language of the tube map to talk about the derailing of public transport. So they've used the visual language to try and attract the viewer's attention to the topic, but and then almost secretly change the meme from what you might expect. So it's quite a clever. It's not really a pastiche, but it's a form of pastiche on the existing visual languages. And these sort of ideas, once you get an idea like this in your mind, if you get it, you can really run with it and you can really make it work for you as a design, and quite quickly. This looks sophisticated, the way it's been drawn, but you might find a similar kind of method within your own design. And this poster I put on here because although it looks subcultural, it looks quite sort of edgy in some way, it's basically a 2-column design with a very limited palette of colors. So if I just draw line down the middle there, we see on the left hand side we've got some text in a smaller column, and on the right hand side we've got some imagery on the right hand column. So it's a simple 2-column design that's been concealed through the use of the angles and the shapes to give it this sort of 3D effect. So what looks sophisticated initially is actually quite a simple diagram to draw, and not that I'm expecting you to feel like you want to sort of jump off and do something quite as elaborate as this, but you can consider, if you get the basics right of your columns and your grid and your structure, a lot of the hard work then is done for you, and then you can actually get into the sort of more ambitious and sophisticated design work. Right, I just wanted to add in a couple of posters I've had to do over the last few months, just so you can see that I do have to do this sort of thing too. This was a poster for promoting the accessibility of our Open University video media player for a conference. The poster wasn't to go on the wall. We knew the audience. The audience was to go into some technical people who work within the realm of accessibility for online communications, and we're looking at the way that video transport mechanisms work. Basically the play button, the volume buttons, things like that. This poster was not to go on a wall, it was to go on a table, and people were going to sit around a table, they were going to rotate the poster, and they were going to be looking at it close up, as if it was a huge sheet of A4 paper that they could investigate and talk about. So having small text seemed like was something we could try and do, because people would be close up to it. But we still had to consider how you might navigate this document, how we get across the fact that it was both technical in terms of the software architecture, and it was visual in terms of how the transport, the video interface was designed. and designed schematically and designed with the final skin as well. So this poster, I was lucky, I got a day to do this poster, and we managed to collate it very quickly. And this is something that often happens. So, but I think that, again, it's the same principles. If you consider that we've got two different sections, and I've split it down the middle there, so we've got two kind of columns, and we're working with, and I just dropped in a few areas at an angle, just to try and make it look a little bit interesting in terms of the shape. I didn't want to keep everything right angled, because I was worried that it was starting to look a little bit boring. I just gave them a little tilt. Next slide. This was a slightly more sophisticated poster for a conference in America. One of our professors had to go and talk about technology-enhanced learning. It had to have something of a sales pitch about it, but we didn't know who the audience would be or how sophisticated they would be. So we had to keep it simple, less text. The diagrams are there really to communicate that we are thinking about this at a data level, but not expecting people to actually look at the text on the diagrams. There are little areas which you might want to worry about. I never really knew what to put in there, so I just threw a scribble in, because it was the idea of collaborative working and sketching through your ideas and thinking about things on first principles. The use of the icons was to try and give a sort of sense of the different areas from a visual point of view and to reinforce the title. Then the use of the arrows to help people understand the sequence by which they're supposed to navigate, plus you've got the arrows in the middle here of this sort of virtuous circle. This was an A0 poster. We've got the logos cut off to one side so they don't get in the way, but all those stakeholders, it was important that they were represented one way or another. So yeah, and the next poster, so this was another poster, a slightly more formal academic poster for a conference away from the Open University, but we kind of knew that there would be people interested in the subject of massive open online courses, or MOOCs as they're referred to. So I dropped in some icons to suggest that we're looking at, or we're considering, online communications of one form or another, that people would engage these things using mobiles or desktops or laptops, that we had done data analysis on the subject, and that what we were talking about came from analysis and evidence, and it wasn't just conjecture or theorizing. And the arrows were just to help inroads based on this point here in pink. We color coded that bit pink. The table's not ideal, but we couldn't find a better way to do it. And I did say a few times as we've been talking, it's you do have to put in some difficult areas of information, especially when you're dealing with some of the difficult topics that you're referring to in your work. So don't compromise your research. Just try and look at the best way to communicate it. This is another poster I had to do recently. This was completely outside the realms of academia, and yet it was involved with evidencing scientific research to do with the Kepler project at University of Birmingham, and how data can be transformed into sound. So, and they used the Kepler project is a way of searching for exoplanets, and in 117 light years away or whatever. And light is very difficult sometimes to work with, and so they're using lots of different resonant frequencies to determine what happens scientifically. And a lot of those numbers, when transformed into sound as opposed to light, can reveal a lot of different information to scientists. So the idea came about to create a sort of cosmic look using numbers as a way to convey the sort of the basic title of the Poetics of Outer Space. So, but again, this was without the need to tell a large amount of text or a story, but it does a very similar job in many different ways. And the use of kept the logos separate and out of the way, but they're important. Supporting URLs, they have their own section on the poster, so everything's if you think about drawing lines through it, you're segmenting everything up. So it's quite easy to scan that poster if you're in the fortunate position of not having to deploy too much text. So the final thoughts for the thinking about our design of our poster, we need to be informative and not overwhelming. We need to be eye-catching, clear and concise. We need to be easily interpretable. for a standalone piece, so that should you be called away from your poster for a few moments, somebody looking at that poster might understand what it is you're trying to do and think that they may need to come back and return when you are available. I want to say it's eye-catching. Obviously, it's very difficult to know what that means. But so try it out try your poster design out on a few people. Maybe only hold it up for 30 seconds to some people and say, and then take it down and almost play a form of Kim's game, where ask somebody if they know what it was that they just looked at. Did they know what the subject might be? And that can give you maybe an insight into how well your design's coming along. Include contact details. Easy to forget whilst you're doing this. I'll come back to that in a second, Anish. It's quite lengthy. And A4 handouts of your poster might be a very useful thing to want to do, just in case. The display and presentation, so check the mounting arrangements and the materials. Have your talk planned, as Liz has already highlighted. Let's consider these sort of basic presentation techniques. So we're going to come on a little bit more to that in just a second when we talk about the production of your poster. I just want to have a quick look at Janice's question here, and maybe I can come back to that. So high resolution images with the orange to come out blurry. This is what I was talking about earlier. So when, for example, if I just go back, are you talking about the final posters I showed or the initial ones? Because those posters were designed at A1 or A0, which is twice the size of your posters. If I just go back to here, now the numbers that are created here was created using EPS format. They will scale to the size of a mountain if you want to, and look great and sharp. EPS is a great format for scale. However, EPS and or the alternative vector format of SVG are not always easy to create for the software to create these things, and you may not have time. If you do have time, great. If I go back to this poster here, the small illustrations, I'll try and change my color of my marker pen so you can see it differently. The little icons are placed on here. There again, they were vector. I could scale this any size. And these were JPEGs, and so they couldn't go any bigger than that. For the design I had to come up with was limit. I couldn't make them bigger even if I wanted to. But they look really sharp at this size. 1-to-1, I didn't scale them up. They look sharp. Where's the previous one to that? It was this one here. So the lad sitting here, I couldn't make him bigger. If I made that, looks really sharp when you see the final output poster. It looks as sharp as it looks like you could touch the individual on the piece of paper, and it's a living item. If I was to scale that up, it would quickly go watery, jagged around the edges, and not be so convincing. So the design was, or rather how I handled the images, was limited here in terms of how I could use that image. And these are screenshots. So you see this image here, that comes from a screenshot where I've taken a capture from the screen and I put it on the page. Look at the size of that. That was off my screen of a it was like an HD TV 1920 by 1080 pixels. I made that as big as I could, the screenshot, and then I put it on my poster, and I couldn't make it bigger than that. If I made that bit bigger, it would look blurry. You're absolutely right. So I didn't have that option. But I can make it smaller, and if you make your screenshots smaller, it will sharpen it up. So that's one thing to consider when if you're using particularly bitmapped images, which you are challenged on how they scale. Now, I will show you a link in a little while to where you can go to find some higher resolution images. And if we're talking later in the one-to-one sessions, then I can talk to you about that in further detail. Let's just skip forward in a bit, and we'll talk about some of the software that you might choose to use. So you've got to use whatever software you're comfortable with. We don't want to make this burden too great by learning sophisticated software. I work with the Adobe suite of tools and have done for 25 years now going on. So I've learned Photoshop from the days when Photoshop was a very simple tool. It's now very sophisticated, and I've been able to learn all the new features as they come along. You'll probably feel more comfortable working in a software package such as PowerPoint. or something that you have to use on a regular basis where you do diagrams, that will handle photographs well and can handle text. You can create grids in PowerPoint using the guides. You don't need anything sophisticated like that. In some ways, you've got to innovate. The layout size is going to be 541 pixels wide, sorry, millimeters wide, so 541 millimeters. So you're going to have to divide that into half, into thirds, into quarters to create your columns and grid, and you'll have to come up with methods to do that. One way is just to draw a square, so many millimeters square, and position it across the page. Add lines to help break the space down, and bit by bit you're creating a grid to break the space down and enable you to make a more clear design. As I say, I use Photoshop for my imagery, for my photographs and my bitmapped images, and I use Illustrator to create vector graphics. And I pull the Illustrator files together and my Photoshop files together in InDesign. I use InDesign as a sort of layout of all of these components, put it together. But you can do everything in PowerPoint if you need to. The answer to your question, Ryan, is no. You cannot get InDesign through the OU. You might be able to get free software packages, trial packages for 30-day periods. I invite you to explore that. And the same with Photoshop and Illustrator. But beware that they are sophisticated tools, and if you haven't used them before, then have a look at the trial packages and make a quick decision as to whether you really want to get involved in learning a new software package. If, however, you have used them before, then please feel free to use whatever tools are available to you. Okay, Janice, would I recommend using some of the free web applications? Infographics? Absolutely. I'd encourage you to use whatever the web offers you free of charge, but do make sure that you can output to print in the formats you want. A lot of the free web applications are geared around creating web-specific graphics, things you might use on a website or link to, for example, in some kind of mashup. And so you need to be able to download these files and insert them into a program like PowerPoint. So I think Tuxedo is one that allows you to download high-resolution TIFF, JPEG, or PNG files from your from work you might do online. Not all of the applications do, and be wary of that, or you should end up creating something which doesn't look good enough in print. Well done, Janice, with the easily.com. I don't know that one personally. Just make sure it does output to print. Yeah, PowerPoint is not to be sneered at. It can be quite a sophisticated tool if you're prepared to work with it. You can do a lot with it. You might have to innovate a little bit. Janice, which was the one that you just mentioned, Peter? I'm going to give you a link to it, Janice, but Tuxedo, T-A-G-Z-E-D-O. You will get a link to that shortly. And you'll get the file size for the poster size very shortly on the presentation, so don't worry about that. There you go. As we were talking about it, it pops up. Practical information. So your A1 paper size is 594 by 841 millimeters. So in your software, for example, PowerPoint, you'll create a new document and make sure your file size is that, 594 by 841. That will create a large document. And you'll know it's large. Just type in some text, 12-point text, and look how small it is. You're dealing with a large document. And from working at the correct scale to begin with, you'll find a lot more simple proposition to start planning the space out. I'll put some links in here. Apologies for the terrible color of the links have actually come from. But for helping you with the color palettes, you want cooler.adobe.com if you can't find anything better. I use Cooler all the time. It's great. You can even search through. If you search through metallic plates, or if you want to search on climate change, you'll find people have done hundreds of palettes already on those very topics, and the colors are all there for you to have a look at, and you might say that's the one for me. You might change it a little bit. Definitely good places to get inspiration from. If you want to use tag clouds, I'm not a big fan of them, but other people are, and they can work for you. There's the Tuxedo link, and Wordle.net. You can download JPEGs from Wordle. You can download all kind of formats from Tuxedo. And Tuxedo does actually offer you some very, very clever options to upload to as well. Okay, hi. Your question about width and height, landscape or portrait. You'll notice some posters are in portrait, or some are in landscape. That's for you to decide. I suggest you think about what kind of materials and what kind of story you want to tell, and then see how the space works best for you. You might get halfway through your design and think, you know what, I'm going to change it. I was started in portrait, using it as a 594 width, and I can't get the information in as I want to, so I'm going to swap it around. There's no hard fast rules on that. I've put a link here to a textures website, cgtextures.com, open source textures. People upload things like a high resolution photograph of Hessian, or a high resolution photograph of brickwork or cement or rusty metal or tree bark. These are really, really useful resources if you want to create the right context for a very difficult scientific topic, or a topic on, say, water, how water is used in modern cities, or something like this. You'll find really lovely open source, freely available photographs of water from lots of different points under the water, the light reflecting off the water, tributaries and rivers, etc. Or rusty tin cans, buckets of rusty tin, all these type of images that you would save you the bother of having to go out and find the material. It's there. Create an account. You can download the images, get the biggest one available. There are some paying options on there, which you just avoid those, obviously, unless you really, really want to and you think it really makes a difference. That's your choice and your choice alone. But there are many really great images, and it's growing all the time. They just added an X-ray section, so you've got lots of X-rays of bones in high resolution, blueprints, electronic equipment, circuitry, all this kind of stuff. So CG Textures is a really great site for freely available high resolution photographs. And for silhouettes, now we looked at a jazz poster and they had silhouettes of trombones and clarinets and things. All-silhouettes.com offers you freely available silhouettes, and these are the graphics that, so in my day-to-day activity, I will create silhouettes of shapes of people sitting on chairs. I might need a picture of someone sitting on a chair thinking about something and putting bubbles out of their head of what they're thinking about for a poster. And then I put that silhouette somewhere and I can upload it and share it free of charge to people, put my name against it, and I hope it will promote me in some future event. Lots of people do this, and they put their work on allsilhouettes.com for you to download and use as you wish. It's a really useful site. You can search it on mobile devices, on people running, people with briefcases, lawyers in their wigs. Silhouettes of all these really interesting, what you might think of as quite hard to find imagery. So take a look. Again, even if you don't find something, you still might find inspiration about something that looks good that you could then replicate in some way for your poster. Printing your poster, we've got two basic options on campus. The Central Print Services, which is a facility run by the IT department. They are brilliant in terms of how they'll help you, but there is a cost attached. We'll come to that in a moment. If you're in the MCT faculty, then there are some internal facilities and resources available to you. Yeah, so that's lucky, eh? If you want to use Central Print Services, there's two links there. There's a link, first of all, to their web page on our internal intranet. They're based in F Block room 36. I put their phone number on. Give them a call. If you want to talk to them about wide format printing. Oh, there's a devil coming up. James knows about that. So yeah, if you want to contact them directly, they will help you. And cost for matte paper. Matte paper, it looks good, but it won't last as long. And it's £4 if your department will reach the cost for you. If you're private, then it's £10.32. I would really try and encourage you to take up the glossy paper option, 190 grams. It's really robust, strong stuff. It will take the putting up and taking down and all the rest of it many, many times before it starts to go ragged at the corners. So you get better life out of it. Departmental cost is £10, a private fee is £20.40 for that. Obviously, you get all these as handouts, so you can follow these up later. If you're in the MCT faculty, follow that email address. They're based in the Jenny Lee building, and the cost should be free to you in the MCT faculty. Now, the final date for the posters is the Wednesday, the 3rd of June. However, give yourself plenty of time. Don't leave the posters for the last minute. There's a practical aspect to printing out a poster. I did have a quick chat with the guys in Central Print Services. They reckon it takes about an hour to print out a glossy poster to A1 size from PDF file. So if they've got 20 you want to do, then you've got 3 odd days of working to sort it out. So if you're in the last minute and everyone's at the last minute, then it's going to be a disaster. So from a practical point of view, get in touch with them, just have a chat, and they'll probably say, yeah, if you can try and get in next Wednesday, next Tuesday is quiet, and so on. It can avoid any disappointment, and you'll be under a lot of pressure, and you'll have lots of stuff to think about that are more important possibly than this. So give yourself time, and then it shouldn't be a panic. And really interesting, Central Print also sell cardboard tubes. I think they're about £1.40 each, and then they're really great to store. Roll your poster up, store it in there, and it'll save you get it damaged until the important day comes when you need to stick it up. I say do check the cost, but I think it is about £1.40. And again, I suppose contact them first to make sure they've got plenty of stock for you. Supply PDF files for your final poster. This avoids any disappointment in terms of layout, and PDF also guarantees that the symbols such as any Greek characters, any scientific, mathematical formula, etc. are all correctly formatted. For further information, please do contact us and we'll try and help you any way we can, given any our limited time. For software support, recommend you contact IT. You'll know probably who that person should be, or else contact their normal, where they direct you off their intranet pages, if in any doubt. I'm sure they can help you one way or another. But as I said before, the Adobe Suite's very specialist, so you're not going to get a lot of help with that. However, myself, whenever I have trouble with any of the Adobe Suite, I look to Google, I look to YouTube, and I'll find demonstrations about how to do even simple or very sophisticated techniques. So if you do get ambitious and want to try one of those more larger packages out, then I don't want to discourage you. I just want you to take it as a serious proposition if you do want to use one of those tools. And good luck. I look forward to seeing the posters. We have these chats. I have done it in previous years, and it's fascinating to see what comes out of it all. There's some really, really great posters every year on difficult topics that no one ever in their right mind would choose to do a poster on. And yeah, every year I'm amazed at how you've managed to reduce the complex topic down to a really simple proposition and help promote your research. So it's really, really great stuff, and I really do look forward to it. All the best. I think that's me pretty much signing off. Really.